began not as a sudden, clean break, but as a slow.
This even as it emerged that the company is on the verge of losing its operating license over a 9.2 billion shilling debt owed to the Communication Authority of Kenya.
For hundreds of thousands of Kenyans, a service they had depended on for years was quiet, simply vanishing. That was not a temporary outage. It was a technical glitch. It was a coverage collapse. And it was happening by design. Beginning in early 2023, hundreds of Telkom Kenya's network sites began to go dark. They were being switched off deliberately by a company called American Tower Corporation, or ATC. The reason was simple. Telkom had not paid its bills. The debt had escalated to a staggering 7.1 billion Kenyan shillings. This was the final public symptom of a deep, systemic rot. The result was a massive exodus. In the 15 months leading up to June 2023, Telkom lost 1.62 million subscribers. In the last 3 months of 2023 alone, as the towers went dark, another 800,000 fled the network. The company that had long been the number 3 operator in the country plummeted to a distant 4th, its market share dwindling to a mere 1.7% by September 2024. A pillar of the Kenyan economy, a company whose origins are literally rooted in the country's independence, was now fighting for its very existence. What happened? But this is not about a single unpaid bill. That 2023 network shutdown was not the cause of the illness. It was the final, fatal symptom. The real story of Telkom is a decades-long downfall. This is the story of a company at war within itself, a story of how a legacy of monopoly, a history of unstable ownership, and a series of strategic blunders suffocated one of Kenya's most critical infrastructure assets. This is Ontita reports, and this is the fall of Telkom Kenya. To understand the failure of Telkom Kenya, you must first understand what it was before the brand names, before the fiber optics, before the competition. You have to go back to a time when one entity controlled everything, the Kenya Posts and Telecommunications Corporation, the KPTC. For decades, this was the state's exclusive monopoly over every single message sent in the nation. Every letter, every phone call, every telex, it was a parastatal, a titan of the state-controlled economy. Unlike any other entity that exists in an environment with no competition, it developed a specific culture. It was bureaucratic, it was slow. Its infrastructure was designed not for agile, market-driven growth, but for a simple, universal service obligation. Its workforce was vast. This is the DNA, the institutional cultural code that will be passed down generation after generation. In April 1989, in a landmark move to liberalize the sector, the government unbundled the KPTC. 3 entities were born: the regulator, the post office, and Telkom Kenya. But this split was not a fresh start. Telkom Kenya was a new legal entity, but it inherited the substantial assets, the massive workforce, and most critically, the institutional culture of its predecessor. It was a monopolistic giant built in a bygone era, suddenly forced to compete in a fast, liberalized, and brutal new market. And almost immediately, it was being outpaced. It needed help, it needed capital, it needed private sector expertise. The government, its sole owner, decided to privatize. This was supposed to be the new dawn. In 2007, one of the largest telecom giants, France Telecom, later rebranded as Orange, acquired a 51% controlling stake. The price, $390 million. The promise, a new era of growth, powered by global expertise and deep capital reserves. The government of Kenya would retain a 49% share, but the partnership was almost immediately fraught with financial challenges. The old DNA, the bureaucratic weight, the inability to compete effectively against the new dominant player, Safaricom. It all led to persistent financial losses. By 2012, the company was bleeding. It needed a massive recapitalization. And here, we saw the first sign of a fatal, repeating pattern. When the call for new funding came, the government of Kenya failed to provide its full portion. Its shareholding was diluted. Orange stakes increased to 70%, while the government's share fell from 49% down to 30%. This event revealed a fundamental, toxic dynamic, a state that was a long-standing partner, but one that was consistently unable or unwilling to financially support the entity when it mattered most. Despite the bright orange branding, the company was still the old Telkom. It failed to achieve its profitability targets. The losses continued, and by 2015, France Telkom had had enough. The first savior was looking for an exit. This is the beginning of the revolving door, the perpetual flux, a cycle of new owners, new corporate philosophies, and new strategic priorities that will prevent Telkom from ever implementing a coherent long-term vision. This cycle, this instability, has been a primary contributor to its underperformance. The orange era was over, and the next partner to walk through the door, a private equity firm with a very different model, will set Telkom on a path towards its single most critical and most devastating failure. In November 2015, a new owner entered the picture, but this was not another global telecom operator like Orange. This was Helios Investment Partners, an African-focused private equity firm. This distinction is critical. A private equity firm operates on a different philosophy. It's not by nature a long-term operator. The model is a turnaround. You acquire an underperforming asset, you restructure it, you optimize it, you make it look profitable, and then you find a new buyer for a profitable exit. The partnership was restructured. Helios, through its subsidiary, Jamhuri Holdings, will take a 60% stake. The government of Kenya's share was increased from 30 back to 40%. The first move was symbolic but smart. In 2017, the company rebranded, trading the French Orange identity and reclaiming its national name, Telkom. It was an effort to reclaim its heritage, to signal a new beginning. But behind the new logo, the private equity playbook was in full effect. The strategy was to unlock capital and to optimize the balance sheet. This was meant selling assets. The ex-Telecom's house building in Nairobi was disposed of, and then in 2018 came the single most fatal decision of the Helios era. Telkom sold 723 of its mobile towers, its physical network backbone, to American Tower Corporation, ATC. The deal was a sale and leaseback. Telkom received a large cash injection, but in exchange, it converted its physical assets into a new, recurring, and permanent operational expense, monthly lease payments to ATC for the rights to use its own former towers. At the time, it was presented in a savvy, asset-light strategy, but it was a decision that would later have catastrophic operational consequences. The clock was now ticking, but selling off assets was not the real endgame. It was just preparation for the main strategy. The Helios-led management knew that Telkom as it was could not survive. It was too small, it was being crushed. The only viable path to creating a real competitor, the only way to forge a credible challenger to Safaricom's overwhelming dominance, was to merge. In February 2019, the plan was announced. Telkom Kenya will combine its mobile enterprise and carrier business with Airtel Kenya. The strategic logic was undeniable. The new entity, Airtel Telkom, will command a subscriber market share of 32%. it will not just be a number 2 operator, it will be a formidable one. This new scale will finally provide the foundation to compete on network investment, on product innovation, and on price. For Telkom, this was more than a merger. It was a lifeline. It was perhaps the last best chance for survival, and it was a complete and total failure. The deal did not collapse from a single blow. It was a slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 cuts, with each cut revealing a deeper pathology within Telkom's DNA. First, the past came to haunt the future. In August 2019, the entire deal was abruptly suspended by the Kenya's Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the EACC, and opened an investigation not into the merger, but into allegations of misappropriation of public funds from the original 2007 privatization. The unresolved questions, the lack of transparency from Telkom's past had created a legal and reputational overhang that was now actively sabotaging its only viable future. Second, the regulator came with a barrier. The Competitive Authority of Kenya, the CAK, did eventually approve the merger, but it attached a set of stringent and frankly unworkable conditions. The CAK demanded a 5-year moratorium on selling any assets of the new merged entity. It also demanded that Telkom spectrum licenses be returned to the state upon expiry, not transferred to the new company. The merging parties were furious. They argued these conditions were punitive, and for Helios, a private equity firm whose entire model is based on a future exit, a moratorium on selling assets was a deal breaker. Third, the competition moved in. The market leader Safaricom exerted its own influence. It demanded that Telkom and Airtel settle outstanding debts of 1.3 billion before the merger could proceed. It was a commercially justifiable move, but it added yet another layer of financial complexity and pressure, squeezing the life out of the deal. August 2020, the merger was officially abandoned. The public statements cited challenges experienced in getting all the approvals, but the reality was clear. The deal was crippled by Telkom's own unresolved past, by a regulator that seemed to favor the market leader, and by competitive pressure. This was the definitive turning point. The failure of the Airtel merger was not just a missed opportunity, it was the moment that effectively sealed its fate as a subscale mobile operator. Telkom was now alone, trapped. Its one path to scale was gone, and it was still paying rent on the very towers it used to own.